Hello everyone! Welcome back to another satisfying episode of ProRevenge, the place where justice is served, karma strikes back, and we all get to enjoy hearing how people get exactly what they deserve. Get comfortable, because today I've prepared 3 incredible revenge stories just for you. This first story's titled "My Professor Stole My Research." So I burned his career quietly. They say you should never outshine your master. But what they don't say is what to do when the master is coasting on fumes and you're the one doing all the heavy lifting. I wasn't out to make enemies. My name is Tom. Just Tom. No doctorates, no legacy chairs. I was an adjunct hired term by term, paid barely enough to cover rent, but I had more published work in the past 2 years than the entire behavioral science department combined. My classroom evaluations were off the charts, my students came alive in discussions, and my independent research model? It was turning heads. And that, as I would come to learn, was exactly the problem. If you enjoy the content, subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're from. The department chair, Clayton, had everything I didn't. Tenure. Status. A wardrobe of iron blazers and a wine collection older than my career. He was a legacy. His father had donated the fountain outside the admin building. To him, I was a guest in his house. Useful, but not someone who belonged. The research I built was my lifeline. A model for mapping behavioral feedback loops through real-time cognitive reflection. It was the kind of thing that could reshape how people understood motivation in decision-making. It worked because I tested it relentlessly, first on volunteers, then students, eventually securing trial runs with educators. I stayed up nights debugging equations and coding survey modules. It was personal, a kind of intellectual fingerprint. I presented it once in a departmental meeting, expecting curiosity. Instead, I got nods and silence. Then Clayton pulled me aside a few days later, smiling. "Tom," he said, folding his hands like a priest at confession, "this is groundbreaking. If we package it right, brand it under the department, I think we could land some serious grand money." He used the word "we" like an olive branch, but it was a noose. At first, I played along. My contract was up for renewal. Clayton had the power to kill it with one signature. So I invited him into my process. Let him co-author abstracts. Let him speak on my behalf during a webinar I should have hosted myself. When a major grant opened up, he suggested we apply together. I agreed. It was supposed to be temporary. Then came the silence. Emails unanswered. Calendar invites declined. The press release was my first hint: department secures landmark grant for innovative behavioral modeling. Clayton was quoted extensively. I wasn't mentioned at all. 2 days later, my keycard didn't work. Budget realignment, said HR. My position had been cut. No warning. My name was scrubbed from department lists, my inbox deactivated, my graduate students reassigned to other mentors. They didn't even let me clear out my desk. A student handed me a box of my belongings weeks later. They had thrown out most of my papers. That night, I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by the files they didn't know existed. Early drafts, annotated notes, time-stamped screenshots, email threads. Everything. I hadn't saved them because I expected betrayal. I saved them because I'm an adjunct, and fear is part of the job. But now they were evidence. You can't just walk into a university office and accuse a tenured chair of theft. Not unless you want to be blacklisted forever. You need leverage. You need distance. You need to make sure you don't get caught. So I waited. I watched. I listened. Clayton liked the spotlight. He couldn't resist interviews, couldn't resist panel invitations. He started speaking on my work like it had always been his. It was surreal watching him try to explain variables he barely understood. But he said the right buzzwords, and that's all that mattered. What he didn't know was that I had a friend in admin services. She hated the hierarchy more than I did. I asked her for help. Quietly, she pulled the expense records from the grant wine dinners listed under networking events, a business-class flight to Vienna for a data ethics symposium. No receipts. No accountability. I built a portfolio, my work, his edits, their funding trail. Dozens of files, everyone vetted, dated, and annotated. Then I made my first move. An anonymous envelope sent to the university's Office of Research Compliance. Inside, a summary, documents, and a note. The research you funded was stolen. The real author isn't the one receiving credit. Check your ethics policy. But I wasn't done. I contacted Danny, a former student now working in journalism. She once told me, "I want to shine a light on the people who manipulate systems and never pay for it." We met for coffee. I gave her the flash drive. She listened, wide-eyed, and said, "Do you want to be quoted?" "No," I said. I want it to burn. A month passed. Then came the buzz. Faculty whispering. Department heads disappearing into unplanned meetings. Clayton seen leaving the admin wing pale and shaking. Then the article dropped. Whose work is it anyway? The quiet theft behind a prestigious grant. The story had everything: receipts, timelines, damning quotes from former students and anonymous faculty. It spread like mold in a forgotten fridge. The university scrambled. Official statements. Temporary reassignments. But they couldn't contain it. Too many people had been stepped on. Too many had stories to tell. By semester's end, Clayton was gone. The dean followed. Half the senior administrative board was replaced. The grant was frozen. Future funding collapsed. It didn't stop at one scandal. Others followed. Other departments. Other stories. A reckoning. And me? Still invisible. Still unnamed. But I started getting calls. From schools. From startups. From think tanks. Everyone wanted to know if I was interested. I wasn't. I co-founded a research collective instead. We funded ourselves. No politics, no titles, no stolen credit. Our work spoke for itself. Last I heard, Clayton was teaching a freshman seminar at a community college. No assistants. No grant money. Just a whiteboard, a syllabus, and a clock that ticked louder every year. I wonder if he knows. I wonder if he ever figured out who lit the fuse. But men like him don't see people like me. That's how we get close enough to end them. The university never apologized. My name never returned to the project. That's fine. I don't need recognition. I have something better. The satisfaction of knowing I was the whisper that cracked the marble. The silence that grew into collapse. And the calm knowledge that sometimes revenge isn't loud. It's precise. Patient. And permanent. This next story is titled "The Concrete Sabotage That Silenced a Petty Neighbor." You never really know someone until they start losing sleep over your roofline. I moved into the lot after years of saving, planning, negotiating. It wasn't much: a cleared rectangle between two proper houses, flattened dirt with a compact temporary prefab cabin set up in the corner. Fully insulated, outfitted with a solar kit and portable water system. Legal, permitted, and modest. Just enough to live in while I built my actual home from the ground up. My hands. My tools. My sweat. It was a dream I'd delayed for too long. I was finally doing it. But apparently, just doing it offended Marcus. Marcus lived next door. Ex-contractor. Retired early, bitterly. His house was overbuilt and underloved, an endless remodel frozen in permanent limbo, like a midlife crisis with stucco. He introduced himself by way of suggestion that I should really reconsider that eyesore. And by eyesore, he meant the prefab cabin. It's temporary, I told him. Just until I finish the build. You're bringing down the whole street, he replied, sipping from a tumbler of something brown and judgmental. I tried to let it roll off. Neighbor drama isn't worth the fight. But he didn't let it go. I caught him taking photos of my lot from his upstairs window. He filed complaints with the city in noise, zoning, fictitious utility violations. All dismissed. Until the morning I found concrete. Not on my driveway. Not in a sidewalk pour. No! Marcus, in a stroke of petty genius and felony-level gall, had funneled half a load of wet mix through my prefab cabin's ventilation crawl. Liquid cement pooled beneath the floor panels, seeping into the underlayer insulation, turning the foundation cavity into a tomb of quickset gray. The lower vents looked like they'd been chiseled open. The mix had dried unevenly, crusting like volcanic rock beneath my structure. The air inside reeked of alkali. My boots made a nauseating crunch as I stepped through the door. Half the floor panels were cracked upward. A few screws had burst from the pressure like ejecting teeth. It wasn't just sabotage. It was a message. And I got it loud and clear. I didn't go to the police. Not right away. That's the move Marcus wanted. See, if I called it in, it would have turned into a back-and-forth legal slugfest. He'd deny everything. Maybe claim he saw some kids messing with the prefab. Say he was just concerned, just watching out. He was smart. The kind of smart that knows exactly where surveillance cameras do and don't point. My lot had coverage at the front, but the vents he poured through were on the blind side. No footage. Just evidence. Just concrete. I talked to a couple friends in trades. They confirmed what I already knew: it would cost more to cut the prefab off its now rock-solid foundation than to just gut it and start over. Thousands gone. Weeks lost. He wanted me to rage. Wanted a confrontation. Instead, I played dumb. "Oh no, Marcus, you think this was an accident?" I asked casually one morning as we met at the trash bins. "Probably some kids," he said, too quickly. "Bet they thought it was funny." I watched his eyes when I nodded. Watched him gloat behind that forced neighborly smile. I stopped sleeping inside the prefab. Bought a heavy-duty tent and pitched it behind the future frame of the house. Told people I liked the fresh air. Told Marcus nothing. But inside? I started sketching blueprints of a different kind. See, Marcus had something I didn't: age, time, and bitterness. But I had something he forgot about. Access. He hadn't finished building that garage extension yet. The one that sat, half-roofed, at the back of his lot. For years it had sat in limbo. No foundation slab. No wall insulation. Just framing and exposed dirt. Technically still under review by the city. But that meant it was open. Exposed. Vulnerable. One night, I visited that unfinished space. Measured. Photographed. Planned. Then I called in a favor from a ready-mix operator I knew from my previous job site. Told him I had a one-time job, early morning, quiet cash, no questions. I set up the pour over 3 days. Not at once. That would have been obvious. I waited until the week Marcus left for a golf retreat, bragging loudly about getting away from this trash heap neighborhood. That gave me 4 full days. I dug and framed just enough to mimic an authorized base pour. Laid a moisture barrier. Installed false rebar, nothing structural, just cosmetic. Then, over 2 consecutive mornings, I poured concrete into his garage pit. 3 yards total. Leveled to perfection. From the outside, it looked like progress. Finally. I even cleaned the perimeter, swept the walkway, left his tools neatly organized. By the time he returned, the slab had cured hard and cold, beautifully flat. Just not in the way he needed. Because I had left something underneath. A web of PVC stubs sticking just high enough to look like future plumbing. Not connected to anything. Just glued into the ground and sealed with dry fit caps. To any inspector, it looked like Marcus had poured over unapproved plumbing without permit verification. To Marcus, it meant demo. Full slab removal. Penalties. Weeks, maybe months, of delay. He stood there that morning, staring at the pristine gray slab like it was a tombstone. I stood beside him, sipping coffee from a thermos. "Looks good," I said, cheerfully. "Who'd you hire?" He didn't speak. Not right away. Then, in a voice dry as gravel, I didn't. Marcus didn't confront me. He knew. But knowing and proving are two very different things. What could he say? That someone mysteriously poured him a flawless, professionally leveled slab while he was out of town? That they just happened to guess wrong about his permits? No vandal writes in rebar patterns and smooths their finish with magnesium floats. He couldn't accuse me without explaining how he flooded my prefab cabin with concrete first. So he stewed. The next week, I watched from my tent as a city inspector stood in Marcus's garage shaking his head. They poked at the capped PVC. Measured the elevation. Took photos. Made notes. Marcus's voice, usually booming through fence slats, was low and strained. Word got around fast. Contractors talk. Neighbors whisper. Soon, everyone knew Marcus had screwed up his own pour. The man who mocked my eyesore was now the guy with a $12,000 concrete mistake and a work order to rip it out before any resubmission would be considered. The best part? He couldn't just jackhammer and re-pour. The city had flagged his project for reinspection. He'd have to hire a surveyor, submit a revised plan, and wait months. And with all that, he still didn't have proof it wasn't his own fault. I finished the shell of my new house that spring. Framing, siding, windows. No cutting corners. No rush. Neighbors started complimenting the progress. Some even asked if I could recommend a builder. Marcus never spoke to me again. He did, however, walk slower past my lot. Eventually, the prefab was dismantled and hauled off. I saved one panel cracked, stained by alkali, but I mounted it on the interior wall of the new garage. Not out of sentiment. Out of memory. Because revenge, like concrete, takes time to cure. Pour it too hot, and it cracks. Pour it too cold, and it sets soft. But pour it at the right moment? It becomes a monument. One that can't be moved. This last story is titled Warehouse Timecard Thief Gets Smoked by a Forensic Nobody. They never expected me to count the minutes. That's the problem when you wear a uniform and punch a clock. They think you're too tired to think, too grateful to question. And for a long time, I was. I showed up early. Stayed late. Took shifts no one wanted. All for a job that barely paid more than minimum wage but offered the one thing I desperately needed at the time: stability. I worked warehouse inventory for a regional chain of hardware stores. Night crew. Quiet, repetitive. And for someone like me in mid-30s, no degree, fresh off a divorce, it felt like a decent place to reset. That's where I met Randy. Randy was a floor supervisor. Bald, smug, with that slow-talking charisma that made you second-guess your instincts. He liked to call himself old school, which really meant he liked to bend rules in his favor and mock anyone who couldn't. He also had a habit of fixing our time cards. It started small. A missed punch here, a miscalculation there. I'd clock out at 3:45, and my check would say 3:30. Not enough to raise hell over. Not enough to prove intent. But it added up. And it wasn't just me. One night, after a long shift rearranging seasonal inventory, I found Camila, another crew member, sitting in the break room with her phone calculator open, tears on her cheek, and a pay stub in her hand. They shaved 2 hours off my last week, she said. I asked Randy. He said I must have punched out late by mistake. She hadn't. Neither had I. And suddenly, things clicked. The missing hours, the chronic underreporting, the unexplained shrinkage in payroll that always somehow favored Randy's bonus metrics. It wasn't a mistake. It was theft. Ongoing. Systemic. And arrogant. But what Randy didn't know, what no one in that building knew, was that I used to work in forensic auditing. I didn't just count boxes. I counted everything. I didn't report it. Not right away. People like Randy don't get caught by complaints. They get caught by patterns only visible to someone who knows what to look for. So I built my own system. Each night, I photographed the schedule board. Clock ins, clock outs, break times. I cross-checked it with our punch terminal, which displayed the last 10 transactions if you knew which menu to access. I noted every discrepancy every time someone's punch was later on the slip than it was in real time. I kept my own hours, too. To the second. GPS stamped photos of me entering and exiting the building. I even wore a body cam under my hoodie. It wasn't illegal. It didn't record audio. It just confirmed I was where I said I was. Within 3 weeks, I had a spreadsheet that made me sick. 10 employees. Over 60 hours missing, just from the ones who worked regular schedules. Camila had lost 12. Amir had lost 9. I had lost 15. And Randy? His own time card was pristine. Always perfect. Always rounded up. I started cross-referencing with his team's labor budget. That part was trickier, but I found a terminal still logged into a manager's dashboard. Took a few photos. It showed exactly what I suspected: labor spending down, performance bonuses up. Randy was skimming payroll to meet budget benchmarks and pocketing a sweet monthly incentive for it. I knew better than to go to HR. HR didn't want problems. They wanted clean books and no headlines. So instead, I went to Marcus. Marcus was the regional manager. Cold, careful, and not particularly likable. But unlike Randy, he had something to lose. Reputation. Career. Pension. I didn't ask for a meeting. I left a flash drive in an interoffice envelope marked Payroll Irregularities, Warehouse 14. No name. No return address. But I knew how to write a forensic summary. Just enough to spook the right kind of manager. Enough to trigger a policy audit. 2 days later, I saw Marcus walk into our break room with a folder under his arm and a look like he had just bitten into something bitter. Randy followed him into the office. 30 minutes passed. Then Marcus left alone. Randy didn't. Randy didn't come back that night. We were told he was on leave, but everyone knew better. His clipboard hung untouched. His office lights stayed off. And 2 days later, the district posted a job listing for floor supervisor. Still, I kept quiet. No gloating. No winks. Because this wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about balance. If Randy had just shaved a few minutes, maybe I'd have let it go. But he carved hours off struggling people's checks. People living paycheck to paycheck. That wasn't just wrong. It was calculated cruelty. And cruelty deserves precision in return. The following week, Marcus called an all-hands meeting. Mandatory. Held at 10 p.m. in the warehouse break room. He stepped up with a clipboard and cleared his throat. We've concluded an internal audit of payroll activity, he said. Effective immediately, we'll be transitioning to biometric timekeeping. Everyone looked at each other. Whispers. Questions. No more manual edits, he continued. And anyone found altering punches in the future will be subject to immediate termination and prosecution. He let that word hang in the air, prosecution, like the click of a safety being switched off. Then he handed out pay stubs. Corrected pay stubs. Camila flipped hers over, eyes wide. 2 missing hours returned, plus back pay. Amir let out a low whistle. Even my own stub was heavier than expected. No one said my name. No one needed to. Later that night, I walked the perimeter of the warehouse alone. The hum of sodium lights above, the clink of chain link fences swaying gently in the breeze. I'd taken nothing. No money. No promotion. But the scale had been tipped back. Randy lost his job. Lost his references. And from what I heard, he'd been blacklisted from the entire regional chain. All for a few stolen minutes at a time. See, people think revenge is loud. Explosive. Theatrical. But the best revenge? Is quiet. It's measured. And it always punches out last.